Hi there, I'm Tim Irvine.
And I'm Stacy Irvine. Welcome to the Totum Wellness Podcast.
We're thrilled to have Dan Farthing with us today on the Totum Wellness Podcast. Dan is a good friend of Stacy and mine from our university days. Kinesiologist, has a master's degree, runs a very successful business in Regina called Level 10, and we just started in 2003, so still going strong 20 plus years later. And I know, Dan, you deal with some elite athletes with that, but also general population. At university, you played football, obviously. You've got an 11-year career with the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and then have evolved into their strength and conditioning coach as well. And just to highlight sort of some of the football accomplishments in university, and now it's called U Sport. You were the nation's Rookie of the Year. You were runner-up for the best football player in U Sport, called the Heck Crichton. That's Canada's Heisman Trophy. Vanier Cup champion in 1990, which is Canada's national championship. And then in your rider tenure of 11 years, number 4 still in receptions and part of the Circle of Honor for the riders as well, which is a huge accomplishment. There's not, of all the people that have played for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, which are many over, decades and decades, there's not too many that have received that honor. So congratulations on that. And obviously, currently strength and conditioning coach, you won a Grey Cup with the riders in that position. Was that 2013? Yeah, 2013. So super
It's
accomplished.
a really long bio, Dan. What the hell? It might be a record on our podcast. I love it.
Yeah, that's good. We're done.
Well, thank you very much for thinking of me as someone you'd like to have come on the podcast. It's an honor. So thank you very much for thinking of me, and it's always awesome to reconnect with you guys in any capacity at all.
Okay, first question. Were you so happy that Toronto beat Winnipeg this last weekend? Because we were.
Yeah, we were actually. I don't know that you'll find many people in Western Canada who would cheer for the Bombers willingly.
Mm-hmm.
They generally cheer for the Eastern team, and I know that might seem like in direct opposition as to what our parents might have done. You always cheer for the West or you cheer for the East, but
right.
Now it's more like you just cheer against the Bombers.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, we were just, I wish that Bomber team that played in the Grey Cup was the team that we played in the Western Final, because I think we might have been in the Grey Cup then, because we were, as you mentioned, we were one win away from being there, and we would have loved to have been there for sure.
So Dan, you've obviously working with elite athletes and have for many years. And one of the things that we're really interested in is, let's say, the last 10 years, the evolution of the type of training that you're doing with these incredible athletes. What are some latest and greatest that you're incorporating?
Oh, well, it has evolved, a ton. I would say actually, we could even go back to, our high school, university days. I mean, things have changed a ton, but at the same time, there are still some tried, tested, and true things, some very traditional things that we still do that we would do in the weight room like tomorrow. Those things would definitely be part of what we do. But there has definitely been an evolution. I mean, there's a lot of different things that would go into describing movement and performance and athletic performance. But I think that one of the things that really dominated the goal setting in those days was just simply magnitude, right? How much can you do, and how big can you get? And in some ways, those things are goals that actually sort of undermine you when it comes time to hit the field, or come time to go onto the ice or onto the basketball court or the soccer pitch, whatever the case may be. Because generally, when you are so focused on magnitude and lifting heavy loads, what generally tends to happen is you become accustomed to moving slow. I mean, we're very familiar with the force-velocity relationship in human muscle contraction, and whenever you're pushing a lot of load, the movement velocity is very, 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 very slow. And so when you try and make that translation and taking that on the field, I think, something is lost in translation, or at least not optimized, because I think we're still maybe activating fast twitch fibers and things, but not in a manner that is specific to the movement that is seen on the field, on the pitch, on the ice, on the court. So I think there's been way more emphasis on other things other than magnitude. So I would say that, one of those things is rate of force development. So not just when you're looking at the curve, not just how high that top peak is, but how fast of a slope you can get to that. So if it takes us a long time to develop that force, that's not going to serve us well on the playing surface at all. So there's more of a focus on using strength or using that magnitude as almost something that's sort of like is almost activation potentiation, where you're priming the muscle, getting it ready and very excited, and lots of motor units recruited. But then you're going to ask those newly recruited motor units to just work super fast or specific to the movement speeds that are on the court, so or pitch or field. So I think that's one of the things. I mean, there's way more attention to like making those things more congruent. Like what you do in the weight room, what you do on the training surface is more closely related to what you're doing during your sport performance.
So a little bit more athletic.
100%. Yeah,
focus on athletic movement.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Like I always like those phases that actually, I say this to the athletes all the time, that ask us to bring the athlete into the weight room, right? Where it's not just like pushing iron, lifting, pulling, pressing, all those sorts of things. It's jumping, it's bounding, it's throwing, it's exploding, it's rotating hard. All those things that are things that you would use to describe an athlete when they're actually playing, rather than slow, speed, strength, So, other things I think that also describe movement, I think quality, I guess magnitude would fall under the umbrella of the quality of the movement. But when I say quality, I'm thinking of like pain-free, limitation-free, restriction-free. So I think there's a lot more emphasis on mobility. Do you have the ability to go through an entire range of motion without any sort of restrictions or limitations? Do you have actually a capacity to have good strength throughout that whole range of motion as well? So that those sorts of things might ask us to incorporate some accommodating resistance in the weight room, like using bands or chains or things like that sort of change the resistance throughout a single rep as we move through ranges of long levered positions where we're weaker to short levered positions where we're stronger. That you picking up extra lengths off the floor adds added challenge. So when you add to those as you go through those biomechanically advantageous positions, it's like someone's putting on plates as you rise from a squat or as you rise from a bench press. So those are things that we're always paying attention to as well. I think if you want to touch on some of the tech that we're using as well, that's kind of interesting as well. Some of those things are innovative right now. I would say things that I wasn't even using the last time I was around with the team in 2013. That's already over 10 years ago.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So, what would you say as far as tech goes? And we'll have a different conversation about recovery, but what tech are you using in the weight room, on the field with the players right now?
So in the weight room, so this is kind of related to what we were talking about. There's an ability to kind of like monitor the speed of the bar. So it's velocity based training a little bit more. So like you do that with a tether string or with an accelerometer that's magnetically attached. You know what? There's actually even some apps right now that when you're filming someone doing it, there you can actually,
cool. Yeah,
as long as it's on the screen with good view, like they can actually tell you what the speed of the bar is if it's in real time, right? So I think there's still some research that needs to be done with those to kind of sort of like prove their accuracy, reliability, and their validity as well. But it's a great tool. Like I'm not like, I like to think of myself as a scientist, but what I do on a day-to-day basis is not that. There's not a need for that much empirical accuracy, right? So,
right.
But just knowing that like if we're using velocity to tell ourselves or to ask ourselves, is the athlete kind of like in a training state to receive this stimulus right now, or do we have to back off the load so that they can achieve the barbell speed? So those are some things that change, like when we're going throughout the course of the year that we might use. There's some impracticality issues with those when you're servicing 50 to 70 guys in a weight room. It's kind of tough to have them all work that load, but I do like the idea of it. I think it's fantastic. So again, that's velocity based stuff. But honestly, you can do the same sort of things with RPEs, like rate of perceived exertions, and reps in reserve is another sort of metric that's kind of like gathering momentum right now too. And both of those two things have shown to be like accurate when self-assessment is happening rather than the velocity base. So maybe you don't need the tech. The only tech you need is to be able to record it and do the calculations as to what the load should be, kind of thing. But those will achieve the same thing. It's all just sort of auto regulation, right? So what is my capacity to subject myself to the stimulus today and then adapt to it? If I'm not ready for it, if I'm too tired for it, if I don't have the capacity to adapt, and if it's only going to harm me, then I should back off, right? So that's probably important throughout the course of any season. And arguably, I think these things too are way more important for like sports like hockey and basketball, or maybe even baseball. But I'd say hockey and basketball, when you're playing like
The high
so
volume.
many
Yeah.
games in a week, and the season is like, the off season is 2 months. Like, I mean, our off season started a week ago, and we're not going to see each other again until the middle of May. That's a pretty nice schedule when you're talking about load management. Though I don't, honestly, sometimes I don't even know how those athletes do it, and how the strength and conditioning coaches, even try and
Manage
work
that
their craft.
season.
It's damage control more than anything.
Yeah.
I would think it's just other things that we're doing that are pretty cool. Like, well, the brand name of it is called Catapult. It's kind of the same as our video system here, but a Catapult device is an athlete monitoring system. So it's a tracking device. So there's a GPS system that monitors where the athletes are on the field, and also accelerometers in those devices as well. So basically, what we can do is we can track how much yardage a player is putting on in any given practice, how many instances of acceleration. So going from zero velocity to breaking through a hole, or starting from zero and accelerating. That's generally hard on a body. Even harder on a body is rapid deceleration. So when
Right.
we're running full speed and having to break down and really eccentrically load, that's super hard on a body. It also can measure too, like sudden impact. So like when there's velocity and then a sudden stop, the devices kind of interpret those things as like a contact, right? So like someone has hit you and then you've hit the ground, kind of thing. All those metrics kind of go into something that we call player load. And there's a number that actually lets us know how much load a player is actually experiencing throughout any given week. There's some other interesting discussions that we could go on about this too, just about the use of the data and how private it should be, and should there be a name attached to it, because the players, do they want to be monitored all the time? A player who's going through his 8th, 9th, 10th year, and is this device going to give the management team here an idea of whether or not this player is slowing down now, and maybe we should cut him? So it's an interesting dynamic, like, because they know it's for their own safety, because it's like it's a player load monitoring thing, but some of them don't want this information out there if it's going to shorten their careers. I mean,
It is a really interesting conversation. We've also seen players negotiating with their contracts around here that you have to keep the load down to a certain number.
wow, yeah,
So
that's crazy.
they know what their number is, and I won't name any names, but they come into the season saying, this is what I'm prepared to do for the team, but you got to
Yeah,
keep my load down to this number because I perform best when I'm down at this low number.
yeah.
So I think that stuff is absolutely fascinating.
And do you see something like that system actually having a positive impact on injury reduction?
Well, it definitely could if you're overloading a player for a period of time. Yes, I think that we basically call it redlining, because the color scheme on the system, when I download the data and then process it, I'm looking at it, and it comes yellow when it's in a cautionary sort of range, and then red when you sort of redline the athlete. In terms of, like, if you liken it to RPMs, it's just like it's not good for them. Interestingly enough, this is the only players, because our practices, and I would say the NFL would be the same. Football has just changed so much. Like, honestly, I don't even know how they evaluate players in practice, because there is very little contact. There is, everything is scaled down. Like, there's still pushing and shoving and things like that, but in terms of load management during a practice, there's hardly any contact. Like, so if I was to look at the contact metric on the devices, our practice would be minimal. And some of the guys that come to us from the NFL say the same thing. They're really managing load by not letting players do that sort of stuff in practice. And we have these discussions all the time, though, too, because since that's not happening in the practice, and the only time they're experiencing these high velocity, violent, chaotic collisions is in games, is that helping or hurting injuries? So we're doing
Right.
this thing to try and help them injury wise, but then their bodies get into this car accident situation and they're not really prepared. And maybe their tissues aren't ready for it too. Like, I
Right.
mean, in terms of the structural integrity of the connective tissue, joints, ligaments, the tendons, everything is not seeing that sudden sort of car accident type of collision on a routine basis to actually produce the adaptation. So you're throwing them into the situation and say, good luck. I know you haven't ever done this before, but go collide with somebody. So it's kind of, it seems to be in contradiction, like, and if I was to go back to the monitoring devices in practice too, here's the thing, like, I collected so much data this year, like, and just analyzed it. And, the players, they were pretty interesting too, because they sort of gamified it too. So they would come in and they would go, if they felt they had to really accelerate for a long pass, they go, what was my max velocity today? And they knew they had a good day on that. And they'd ask me to pull it up and they wanted to know where they were on the leaderboard and all that kind of stuff. And so they're interested in that, and they also know when they had a tough day, like when maybe in the receiving core, if one or two of the receivers were nursing an injury, and that put scout team load on the other players, their yardage would go up, and what would happen is they'd come in and they go, how many yards did I do today, kind of thing, and they were right, they were redlining themselves in that regard.
That's so interesting because, since these devices have been around and, they came on the scene probably 10 years ago. And I remember people asking me, well, do you have a Whoop band? Do you have this? And I wasn't training for anything in particular. And I said, no, like, I know when I work hard, I know when I have a good night's sleep. I don't actually need to see it on a chart or a graph.
Yeah.
And I do think that there's a bit of a happy medium in between these things. Like the numbers can become, in some cases too meaningful. And in some cases, I guess, you do need some hard data maybe to help motivate someone. One thing I was going to ask you about, we've also seen people heading into the weight room using a grip test, essentially like hand dynamometer, and that determines what type of a workout they're going to do that day. So if you test well on your grip strength, you're good to go for a hard workout. And if you don't test well, the strength and conditioning person is going to pull back the workout a bit, because maybe you haven't recovered or something. Are you guys using anything like that heading into the strength training?
Well, I'm a big proponent of sort of specificity. So, like, if we're clutching and grabbing this, yes, there is some general application that you can have for your forearm, flexors. However, I can't count on my hand how many times I have told a guy, okay, we have this going on in our body at post game. This is what happened to you. So I want you to not do bench press or overhead press today, or I want you to scale it back, but you're going to row or lat pull down really hard today. So by a dynamometer, this guy probably couldn't do very much. He was kind of hurt, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then I would back off and miss a fantastic opportunity to help him stay strong in his back musculature, his posterior chain, maybe, something like that. I'm just using a specific
Yeah,
example
that
here,
makes sense.
but I just think you can work around stuff a lot of times. Like some guys would have had like a terrible game, like let's say a starting defender who doesn't generally play on special teams all of a sudden is thrust into special teams duty because one of our starting guys got hurt. So his legs are going to be like shot the next week. So I might not work his legs out, or his legs aren't going to be ready to receive a training stimulus that week. So I might not do that on his legs, and I might still try and get him to maintain some upper body strength, both push and pull. So and really honestly, if he's spent and if he's tired, like this hand grip dynamometer might even actually like say that I shouldn't train his upper body when his upper body's good to go when his lower body's shot, or the other way around, one of those two things too. So I think the biggest thing with us is communication, right? It really is. Like I just have to know what kind of went on with the players in that game, have a conversation with them, let them know what they're up for. And on any given week, guys, like there's a whiteboard up in the weight room as well that has, I would say, 5 different weekly tracks on it. So guys come to the whiteboard and they decide what they're going to do that week. So they might do a hard lift early with a day off in between and another full body lift, on day 3 or something like that. Or they might want to stay off the weights and they might want to do back-to-back days. And if they do back-to-back days, I'm obviously not going to do bench press on this day and bench press on this day. I would if there was a day in between, but not if they're consecutive. So there are some guys that would come in and just do one workout a week. There are some guys that like upper body split and lower body split because they don't want to, or lower body, I'll say lower body, upper body, because I should have said lower first, because a lot of guys like to hit their legs early in the week, but then they want their legs to be fresh and good later on. So for me, my whole philosophy, my whole approach to this is kind of meeting players where they're at, just like, what do you want to do this week? What is it that got you to this level? Because you got to this level without me. So let's kind of marry our styles up, our strategies up, and respect what you did to get yourself to this professional level. I'm going to do that because obviously it lets you play at a high level, but I'm just going to make some suggestions here. And there are a lot of commonalities all the time. So the compromises aren't dramatic, but I'm generally really communicating with that. And the point I wanted to make about the whiteboard and how I communicate, so Tim, we could go back to our time too. I totally believe that in a football team, you cannot win a championship without a close knit brotherhood, and in a female sport, a sisterhood. You need to have this closeness, and I think on a football team, a lot of that is built in the off season, and I think there's a lot of good quality team stuff that can go on in the weight room over there. There's a ton of good technology that comes to people via their phones, like through apps, Team Builder, lots of strength and conditioning software that's out there. I had a great conversation with our new head coach here, and he and I are on the same page. We don't want 50 guys in the weight room looking down at their phones and not interacting with one another and getting the data and entering the data and getting the load prescriptions that the data tells them that they should be doing. We want them interacting. We want them old school.
Yeah,
so I'm a whiteboard marker. I'm a whiteboard marker guy with a whiteboard that rolls into the room. I write on both sides, and they pick what they want. And then there's an opportunity so it's almost like the water cooler, right? Or the water fountain. They meet at the whiteboard. They
can
interact,
talk about
they give each other a hard time. There's a dynamic. Yeah, they decide what's a good path. I tried this last week. You should try this week. No one's looking down at their phones. No one's looking down at their tablets. So there's a lot of awesome things about technology. So I don't want to seem like I'm a stick in the mud about that. But I really think there's a lot of really good, wholesome team building stuff that goes on in the weight room. And that is all lost if everybody's glued to their phones or glued to a TV or some sort of monitor as well.
Agreed.
So,
we need more
I just thought
whiteboards.
that just popped in my mind as we were speaking.
That's
too.
great advice.
It's an important place. Yeah,
I think that's something that's important for those clients of ours that might be listening that are, I'm just going to plow through. I'm going to work hard all the time, every time I go in. And what I'm hearing from you is you work with your athletes. You make sure they're educated to sort of understand what's going on with their body. How does it feel? So they can have good, positive input into the decision-making about what should be done, along with the data that you're collecting, so that it's a bit of an objective, but also subjective blend to this information. And then when look, I'm definitely tired today. I don't know why I'm tired today. I got a good sleep last night, but I just I'm not feeling it. And a lot of people can't do that. A lot of people just think I have to work the hardest. I interviewed a potential client not long ago. And this was a CrossFit athlete. And at the time when they were competing, every workout was focused on a PR. Every workout, 6 days a week, going into the gym. How can I PR in one of the things that I'm going to do today? Which this person now understands how that was not the best thing to do.
Well, neuromuscularly, I would say that's practically impossible.
Yeah.
Really. Just from a nervous system standpoint, if you're just completely hammering it all the time, I would say, I'm not going to cite any studies or anything, but I would suggest that is neuromuscularly impossible.
Yeah.
Maybe even from a physiology standpoint, wow, what a smash that
It
would
would
be.
make you
Yeah.
unhappy too, because you probably fail at a
Well,
lot of
yeah,
your workouts.
yeah,
It's interesting with what we do too, and you talk about that community, and we both have situations where we have one-on-one coaching with people, and to me, that's kind of the real joyful part of a one-on-one coaching experience, is that you just get to walk into the weight room. You've got someone to talk to for the whole hour. You're not like
yeah.
walking around, like you said, looking at a device. What's my workout? What's this exercise? And I also think that there's something within all human beings that when we're in a group doing it together, we perform better, because there's always a little bit
100%.
of competitiveness, but in some ways too, it's a little bit of encouragement. And I think with a team, it would be even more so that way. So I just love the system that you have.
Thank you. Yeah, I quite like it too, and I got a lot of positive feedback this year based on that approach and just how I met them where they are. So like I totally agree with you. I think on people's fitness and performance journeys, like the community that builds around that is like half of the joy, if not all of the joy,
Hmm.
because some
Yeah,
of it's straight up punishment, right? So
a hundred
so
percent.
the community that you build is just like, and I know that that's what Totem is all about. That's what Level 10 is all about as well. It's largely about the community, and sometimes like when you maybe had that bad sleep and you don't feel like going, and maybe even your phone or your app tells you maybe you shouldn't take a day, maybe you just feel like, I need the community, I'm just going to go
Yeah.
there and I'm just going to be there,
Yeah.
like I like being there, I like being a part of that, and I don't want to miss out on that. And then 5 or 10 minutes in, you maybe found out that your app was lying and that you're
Right.
actually good to go. Like,
Yeah.
I liked what you said, Stacy, about being too attached to the numbers too, because I think we can. I have a client who's he's very techie. He's got everything that there is, and he's very onto his phone, and it's monitoring his heart rate, it's monitoring his load, yeah, everything. He's on Garmin, he's on with Strava, he's got the Trail for, he's got everything. But honestly, like, and I think to him, like, so you're going to go on a mountain bike trip. Like, this is just me last week. Our season ended. I had to go blow off some steam. I didn't have any leisure, like my leisure time, the things I like to do. So I went for like a 3.5 hour mountain bike out to a place over here in Buffalo Pound. What do you think my phone would have told me that I should not do the very next day? Like, it told me, like, you need 10 days, you need 72 hours of rest. Well, I don't have 72 hours of rest, and I want to go mountain biking again. So I'm going mountain biking again. So I think, sometimes we can be too attached to some numbers, and I think that it has lots of advantages, but let's apply it to the real world here too, and put it in context.
Put it in
So
context.
yeah, I might not have went for a 3 hour ride the next day, but I went for a ride when it told
Yeah.
me I should rest. So,
Yeah.
and it's the same thing if you go on a ski trip or something like that. I mean, like, oftentimes your stuff will tell you, no, you should not do anything because it's going to overload you, and you're like, but I
But
paid
it's
money
snowing.
to come on. It's a trip.
So I think that that's a good point, because you're in a really unique position, because you train these elite athletes. They're physically just machines, and then you have this business that is general population. And how do you take from this elite athlete experience, and how does that blend into what you do at level 10?
Well, honestly, like, when I first got into all of this strength and conditioning life, I guess this profession, this career, I was just training athletes, just training, maybe not elite level, but some elite level, but a lot of grassroots, and then everything in between as well. And then, when people started to approach me about doing fitness training, I was like, I've never done that before. And quite honestly, I was kind of like intimidated to do it, because I was not sure about, like, what is your purpose? What is your goal? And then after a few of these assessments, consultations, I kind of came to the realization that, back to this quality of movement thing, right? Back to this, people just want to have a quality of life. And a lot of what makes people happy are, activity, doing things, right? And they're looking for, a quality of movement that lets them do something at a level that they were like 10 years ago, like, so in terms of force production and power, but also the most important things, and I'm sure you guys could say same thing. I just want to have, like, great quality range of motion with no restrictions and no limitations. I want to be injury free, and I want to address my medicine in a preventative, proactive manner rather than a reactive sort of manner. So if anything that you can put in front of people that lets them achieve those goals, I think the happier they're going to be. And in a lot of those ways, like a lot of the things I just mentioned are very, very consistent, congruent with high performance athletics. So their goals were the same. So after I kind of, let down my fear and and just kind of started training people for fitness, I found out that I was using a lot of the same stuff. A lot of the same movements, motor patterns, the exercises, the core training, the goals of that core training, the energy system development. Everything was very, very, very consistent. I found it to be like not in contradiction to one another at all, and not even to be at opposite ends of the spectrum. It's just all the same. And oftentimes when we do train high performance athletes in the same training environment as what we call general pop, sometimes the general pop people will see these high performance athletes trying to do some of the exercises that they do very well, and they can't do them, and they're like, they're all pleased with themselves because they've been doing them for years, and they know the strategy, they know where to recruit, they know how to activate, and it's interesting because they're motivated by that. Like, they're motivated by seeing someone who's supposed to be a high performance athlete on their way to the Olympics, and they're doing an exercise not quite as well as this person. So that's always interesting too, when you get these people in the same environment, because I think the motivation actually goes both ways. When the pro athlete or elite level athlete sees someone who's in their 50s and 60s doing something very, very well, they're like, oh gosh, that's fantastic, and and they're motivated and inspired by that as well.
I love that. Where I see that a lot is with the teenage athletes, especially the hockey players,
Yeah,
because all they're doing is playing hockey. And
yeah.
then, like, I swear, some of their moms can come into the gym and just crush them in the gym because they don't like that stuff. They don't like doing core work.
So true.
They don't
Yeah,
like doing mobility. So they're,
not
in
at
many
all.
ways, they're good hockey players, but they're not what we would call good movers. And
Yeah,
you see
yeah.
that big diversity, which is very fun.
You see that all the time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that's true
great.
for sure. Yeah, it sure is.
Okay, recovery. That's come a long way in the last few years. And kind of what we were talking about prior to this, is there anything that you've changed, say, in the last few years related to recovery? Like, are you using some of these devices, Normatec? Are you guys doing anything different with massage, sauna, cold? What are you up to?
Um, yeah, this place is quite special. I think we talked a little bit about it before our podcast started here. It's really top shelf, and there is a set of pools in a room downstairs just off the training room, which is like a hot tub. There's a cold plunge. There's an ice bath. There's an underwater treadmill. There's like it's just really top shelf. It's fantastic, and all those things are part of the recovery. Like massage is also part of the recovery, of course, as well. One of the biggest things is like post game nutrition, and then nutrition throughout the whole course of the week as well. And all that stuff plays a gigantic role. I would say the biggest thing that I have really changed, and Tim, I know you'll remember this as well, like what we typically call rundown. So like after a football game, it's like we spoke a little bit about the violent collisions that happen, and oftentimes the just moving the very next day, walking around is just painful and sore and difficult. And basically what happens is, you get sent for a little bit of a jog, and it's maybe evolved since that jog around, the whole Griffith Stadium, Seeger Wheeler, all that stuff, to like, on the field where you're actually, running lines on the field, shuttles, and then maybe it's turning into a high knee skip or a karaoke or some other exaggerated movement pattern that lets us recover some range of motion. Our rundowns are honestly like we basically do some of that, but then we come into the weight room right away, and I call them range of motion recovery workouts. And I don't mean like it's not a recovery workout. You are actually recovering that lost range of motion because you are so tight and so sore and bruised up. And generally what we do is I create this big circuit that is anywhere from like 16 to 28 exercises. And this list of exercises that they go through is just a really light movement pattern, maybe just body weight, maybe just light dumbbells, maybe just an empty barbell, and then a stretch for that particular muscle group. And then we move on to the next thing, which would be a lower body squat or a step up knee drive lunge or something, and then a quadricep stretch. So we just go around the room doing that, getting blood flow to that pad, to that particular muscle group that's used in the lift or movement, and then maybe, stretching, whether it's a static hold or a PNF pattern or whatever. And that's our rundown. So by the end of it, like we've gone 2 to 3 circuits around this full body, multi-planar, multi-movement sort of press, or multi-joint is what I was going to say. So it's like you're using lots of joints. You're operating in sagittal and frontal, transverse planes. You're doing everything. And then you're also, challenging yourself with a little bit of a relaxing stretch as well. So everybody's really sweating by the end of it. It's not high load. Although at the same time, if the players that are in the room that haven't played, there's a little circuit that they do that is a little bit more, taxing. Um, but so that's completely different. And when they leave, they feel great, like they feel absolutely fantastic. But, when they start that first round through, it's painful to watch, really. Like it really is.
That's
It's
so
like, whoa,
interesting.
yeah, it is. And we're not running anymore. We're not just going for a jog. We're
Yeah.
actually doing a full on circuit in the weight room.
And more focused. I think that's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
really smart idea. How long would that circuit take on average for the players that played?
It would take an hour. Yeah, it would
That's
take a
great.
full hour. Yeah, they would go through it for a full hour. They'd just do a really, really, really quick warm up, because basically the first round of it, you could, with a light load or just body weight, it is pretty much a warm up, right? So they would just go through it anywhere from 2 to 4 times, like, and it's a nice system too, because it's on the whiteboard, obviously, and all of our players, we have our film breakdown, and all the different position groups come to us at different times too, so we don't all start at the same time. They just come in and join the circuit, and I just tell them, you can start here, 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 or here, and get going, kind of thing. So yeah, it would take guys anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour, and that's a big departure from what they're used to as well, and a dramatic departure from what I was used to back in the day too. But it definitely serves a great purpose, and again, in our exit meetings and everything, a lot of positive feedback on that as well.
And would you say for the personal training clients that you have, if they've done a really intense workout or had a week of really intense work, is that something that you would use with them? Let's say they're coming in 3 days a week and you say, okay, on Saturday, you go do this run plus these 16 moves, go, loop through it a couple of times because you're going to be stiff and sore by the time you get to the end of this week because of the types of workouts. Same sort of idea.
Yeah, yeah, I'd say that again, that communication, right, between you and your client on a personal training level, and that sort of like appointment situation. But I would say that there are several classes throughout the course of our week, group fitness classes that you would have throughout the course of the week, that you could pick and choose and register in, and know that that's the purpose and goal of that session. It's not going to be a strength and conditioning type of session or a perform session. It's going to be a range of motion and a recovery sort of session. So maybe with we'll just call them mobilities or yoga patterns and flow patterns and things like that. Like, so you could pick that, and those sort of things are almost always available. So again, meeting people where they're at and just having that sort of menu item available on our weekly offering is helpful for people. So you don't have to make a point of saying that to your particular trainer. You could actually do your workout still, and maybe just the next day go to that class instead of a training session.
And they just have to understand that, this is an important part of their overall picture for maintaining mobility and or improving mobility over a longer period of time.
For sure. It's just it's just part of it's a different goal. I mean, there are so many different things that describe wellness, that describe fitness, now that describe performance. And that goes back to our original conversation. So many different elements to it. And if you're only handling one, and in my earlier example, if you're only looking for magnitude, that peak force development, you're missing out on a whole lot of levels of performance. And from a fitness perspective, if you're focusing on just strength and not looking at conditioning or core strength or range of motion, in my mind, you're not well. You're forgetting a lot of pieces of that pie. So yeah, I think having those options, or education, like we talked about that too, right? I mean, educating them on what does fitness, wellness, performance look like? What are all those adjectives that would describe a high performing, injury free, or fit or well person? What are those things that describe them, and how are we going to achieve all of those adjectives?
I think it's a really good approach for many reasons, but also that it's more fun. You've got more variety. You're not doing,
Yes.
3 sets of 10 of bench squats and cleans all the time. I love this approach to things. I think it makes so much sense for people. And then teaching them, that being a good mover, it incorporates so many different things. And I do think it really does translate. I'm wondering if you see this again. I've got younger athletes than you, but I'm finding that we're really fighting the posture of, the phones and the devices, that
Yeah.
they're coming in and they're missing, like, uh, to be specific, like a lot of the back body is weak. And
Hmm.
I have to believe that it's because their lifestyles become so much more sedentary. Now you're picking from definitely a different group. You would be looking at people who probably are really active all the time. But what are you seeing anything like that? Like from guys being hunched over their gaming device or their phone too many hours on a day?
I would say that it's not unusual. I mean, there are definitely I would say that there's lots of different issues, I guess, that would arise in the athletes. And I'd say the postural thing, I 100% agree with you. I think that is just a function of our and a commentary on our whole world right now, right?
Yeah.
Like we're tied to our devices. We're always looking at computer screens, and we're always looking at personal devices as well, and that's just sort of lending itself to a certain sort of posture. And I think we often see this. This is interesting too. Like some of my personal clients are dentists, and
Oh,
to
yeah.
see them working like this all the time with their shoulders rounded forward, hunched forward, and rotated, and then they go and try and hit a golf ball, and they're wondering why their backs are sore. And like I think the posture that we maintain for the other, like if we're up for 16 hours, the other 15 hours, that's going to be the default. And with that default comes asymmetries. Like I think a lot of imbalances and asymmetries are the root of almost every injury, right? And movement dysfunction. That was something I was actually going to touch on a little bit earlier too, as something that's changed dramatically from my training style as well. And maybe this is something that would help with the younger athletes too, because I do really, really like it now. And basically what it is it's unilateral training. It's
Yes.
basically like, instead of doing things that are bilaterally symmetric all the time, which is very, very characteristic of bench press, very, very characteristic of squats, very characteristic of, your lat pull downs. But when do we see those perfectly balanced symmetrical forces in sport or in life, right?
Hmm.
So
True.
we almost never do, right? So I'm right now, there's periods in here in our weight room, more in the off season, and we're about to head into it in December here, just to kind of like address some of these dysfunctions and asymmetries. I'll get someone to lay down on the bench with one dumbbell on one side of their body, so not even a stability ball that they can kind of roll to make work for them. If they're on a bench and they're holding one heavy dumbbell on one side, I mean, just go home and try it yourself. Try to do a heavy bench press on one side of your body without your feet kind of squirming all over the place to try and maintain balance. And is that kind of more like kind of some of the forces that they might see on the football field, where their one side is working, not just like a bench press like this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of like the core engagement that happens as a result of us doing single-sided exercises and asymmetrically loaded, wow, I think that's a great strategy that I think every trainer needs to incorporate. I really do. It's huge. And because like I said earlier, like I think like if we're unbalanced from side to side, if our right side of our body is our dominant side, and maybe that's our takeoff leg, and we don't know that because all we're ever doing is barbell back squats, parallel stance, and symmetrical. We don't notice these little sort of adjustments that our body makes to compensate, to give more work to our strong side. All of a sudden, you're doing a single leg squat with a dumbbell on one side of your body, and you're going, oh boy, the left side's got to catch up a little bit here. Otherwise, there's going to be some problems in my SI joints. And, just as an example. But like, I see huge value in that. I see huge value in addressing asymmetries, addressing dysfunctions, activating the core as a stabilizer, because you are not loaded or balanced from side to side. A lot of the guys, that's not something they're familiar with here, but again, something they really realize the importance of and understand what it does to their body when they're asked to do it. It's a movement challenge that they're not familiar with that in my mind can do nothing but good.
I'm happy to
It's a
announce
great
that I just got certified as perfectly symmetrical just earlier this week. So
You did.
so I got that
That's
going for
fantastic.
me.
Wow, that's really
Yeah.
good. I would say that you're probably in a very, very low percentile of people. Then,
Well, it came through a text on my phone. I had to pay $1,000 for the certification, but I'm supposed to be getting the certificate soon.
I'm sure you will.
And on that very important note, any other questions, Stace?
We could go on forever.
We really could. Yeah.
I know. We got to do part 2. To Dan's point about the asymmetry and training that way, it's funny too when you think, because we used to give weights a tough time because a lot of our exercises were built around bodybuilding. And then we used to say, okay, that's a waste of your time. Don't do your triceps, don't do your biceps. So then we went into all this compound stuff. But when you think about when you're looking at the Olympic lifts, like the bench and the squat and all that, they were designed for Olympic lifters to compete in that event. So, and even though we all love to do them because it's a benchmark to say, I can squat this, I can bench this, and every athlete loves that, the functionality is probably quite limited to our everyday life. So it's a really interesting point to think about. My final question for Dan would be, when the guys come back in May, what are you using? What testing are you using? What do you want to know about them?
This is another interesting thing in terms of the relationship between the teams and the strength and conditioning people on the teams and the Players Association. So we don't actually do any tests.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think that the last time a lot of athletes, including NFL athletes, would have done tests would have been at their combine.
Yeah.
Yep. And so yeah, in terms of what we recommend that they should be able to do when they show up at training camp, these are recommendations and recommendations only. We hope we hope that they will have put in a foundation of running. We hope that they will have not only done the sport specific movements that are the movement challenges of their specific positions, but also worked against somebody so that some of those motor patterns are happening under load, where someone is actually pressing on them, or actually also happening where they're not so self-paced, that they're force-paced tasks, where like an external cue is telling them which direction which way they should go, and the cue of when to actually do it and what direction to actually do it, and all those sorts of things. I think those are really, really important elements. We can sort of tell who's been doing what in the off season. I mean, but it is quite subjective, and we're not really supposed to be testing them per se. And again, that happens throughout the weight room as well. Like, we're not supposed to be like monitoring them like really intensely throughout the off season. We're supposed to, like, I would send out team builder programs, and they would be following the program. There are fields that they can populate with their data, but I'm not really supposed to be looking at them, and I assure them that I'm not looking at them. I say, you populate the data so that it can calculate your percentages of your 1 rep max, but we're not keeping track of you. We're not following you. You're not wearing a GPS device all off season, so we see what kind of work you're doing. They need to be free of us, and that's kind of the break from us. So it's a lot different than one might think, in terms of like high performance athletics. There's a lot of we're just asking you to be a pro. You got to be a mature pro and handle what you need to handle, and show up with a readiness to go through the rigors of a training camp.
Like that
But
approach.
it's interesting. It's not typically what people would think.
Dan, thanks very much, man. We've just scratched the surface here. There's so much more that we can dive into, and at some point we'd love to have you back to do just that. But in the meantime, pleasure to talk to you. It's been great having you on the Totum Wellness Podcast. And we look forward to seeing you again.
I want to add one thing. We
Yes.
better block, like you've given some really good information here. We better block all the Blue Bombers strength and conditioning team
True,
from this
true.
podcast. I don't want them to hear any of this.
Well, thank you very
you,
much
Dan.
for having me, guys. I really enjoyed myself. And again, like you said, I feel like we've just sort of scratched the surface. There's so many fantastic things to talk about. And, on this podcast, let me just give you guys a heartfelt thank you and express some gratitude too, because your mentorship in my earlier years was something that I have found immensely valuable and is in no small part a big determinant of my success over the past 20 years with Level 10. So thank you guys both as
That's
well.
very, very nice of you.
Thank you.
Go Riders.
Go Riders.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Totum Wellness Podcast. Please follow us on Apple, Google, or Spotify and leave a 5-star review and comment. Subscribe to us on our YouTube channel, and please spread the word to family and friends.